Good evening and welcome everyone. Bienvenidos. I am Rosa Cabrera, Director of the UIC Rafael Cintrón Ortiz Latino Cultural Center, better known as the LCC. Thank you for joining us in this virtual space for the 5th season of Climates of Inequality presentations. Just a little bit of background on Climates of Inequality. We started this series in the fall of 2020 as part of the Humanities Action Lab's Climates of Inequality project, with the goal to highlight local, national, and international leaders working on environmental and climate justice issues. Guest speakers have been sharing frameworks and solutions to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change and environmental harms affecting Black, Brown, and Indigenous community, as well as women, the very old and young, low-income earners, and the LGBTQ, disabled, and undocumented communities. This project also involves a traveling exhibition telling the story of 22 communities in the US, Puerto Rico, Colombia, and Mexico. They have been burdened by environmental injustices for decades. It includes the story of Little Village, developed by the LCC with community partners Alianza Americas and Little Village Environmental Justice Organization known as LVEJO. Last year, we expanded the Chicago story to feature other sacrifice zones in the city, including McKinley Park, where the exhibition is currently showing in the space of neighborhoods for environmental justice. So I highly recommend it if you have the time to check out this exhibition there. The presentation today will highlight truck traffic in the city of Chicago as a major source of diesel pollution, leading to serious health problems for those who live in communities near industrial corridors and major highways. In 2023, LVEJO and the Center for Neighborhood Technology conducted a study to better understand how many trucks are on our streets and which neighborhoods are carrying higher risk of exposure to diesel pollution. Before I introduce our guest speakers, a few shout-outs of appreciation are in order to our partners, Alianza Americas and LVEJO, for their ongoing collaboration over the past 5 years, and to the Humanities Action Lab, where the Climates of Inequality project resides, for helping us sustain this program. To our co-sponsors, the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies, Freshwater Lab, Great Cities Institute, Las Ganas Project, Museums and Exhibition Studies, Social Justice Initiative, and Sustainability at UIC. Also to the student panelists in my environmental justice class, who will facilitate a short conversation with our guest speakers after the presentation. They are Anissa Camacho, René Ramos, Luna Valderrama, and Monse Garcia. So we're very excited to have with us today 3 local environmental justice leaders who were part of the truck counting study and will share with us some of the major findings in the study. I will start with Carolina Macias. She's the Senior Mobility Justice Research Organizer at LVEJO, dedicated to advancing racial, climate, and health justice with a focus on mobility justice through organizing, research, and policy advocacy to improve multimodal transportation systems and address public health challenges and inequities in the built environment. Carolina holds a BF from the UIC School of Public Health. We also have with us Melanie Minuche, who is the Neighbors for an Equitable Transition to Zero Emissions Coordinator at LVEJO. Net Zero is one part of the larger Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which advocates for a transition away from polluting diesel-powered medium and heavy-duty trucks in Illinois. Her role is to bridge the gap between policy and community education and organizing around zero-emission vehicles and transportation. Melanie holds a bachelor's in social work from Loyola University of Chicago. And our third presenter is Paulina Vaca is an associate on Center for Neighborhood Technologies Urban Resilience team. She writes and edits innovative web tools, conducts qualitative research, designs resources for frontline environmental justice organization, consults with local governments for sustainable and equitable city, and leads CNT's freight transportation work. Paulina holds a bachelor's in environmental studies from Loyola University of Chicago. So now please join me in welcoming our three presenters. Thank you.
Yay, thank you so much for having us. It's an honor. I've usually been on the side of the audience, so it's nerve-wracking, but also an honor to be presenting today. So we're gonna get started with our presentation, counting trucks for environmental justice, data from the ground up. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you a brief overview of today's talk. First off, we'll be briefly outlining the key issues that communities face in relation to truck traffic and its impact on their well-being. We will also give you some local historical context that led us to the creation of the truck data portal, as well as the different ways in which the data is currently being utilized. Then we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of the presentation, where Paulina will be sharing with you the findings and the methods of the project before we share a bit about the ongoing advocacy efforts and wrapping up with some Q&A. Next slide, please. So we thought it was important to start off by sharing with you the framework that has guided much of this project. Mobility justice. Mobility justice, as defined by our comrades at Equaticity, is the ability for all marginalized people to move freely and safely through our communities and cities without the fear of state, institutional, and systemic violence. This includes not just the threat of police violence, but also the interpersonal violence and vehicular violence, whether you're walking, biking, or taking public transit. So at its core, mobility justice is about ensuring that people, especially those from marginalized groups, can travel without the constant worry of harm or barriers. This framework was essential because it reminded us that mobility isn't just about transportation infrastructure, it's also about addressing the social and systemic forces that restrict freedom of movement for many in our communities. So as we look at the impacts of diesel pollution and the larger transportation sector, it's critical that we consider how these systems affect mobility for all, but particularly for those in environmental justice communities. Next slide, please. So here we began this project by taking a step back to consider the key issues that communities face in regards to truck traffic. This reflection helped us to pinpoint specific problems that our data could potentially address. So first, we looked at the health impacts of diesel. We recognized that diesel exhaust is significantly more toxic than gasoline, with studies showing that it can be up to 100 times more harmful. With the increase of truck traffic, we recognize the serious risks it poses to pedestrians and cyclists. So these groups often lack adequate protection on our roads, and the presence of trucks complicates their safety. For instance, we've heard from residents in Little Village living near streets with high truck traffic that they fear crossing certain intersections. Many would rather take longer routes or wait for a ride from a relative just to do basic tasks like grocery shopping or laundry. We also focused on environmental justice and specifically sacrifice zones. And it seems like a lot of you are fairly familiar with this term. We know that communities often in low-income communities and majority communities of color near industrial facilities or military bases face higher exposure to diesel and other chemicals. Lastly, we recognize the ongoing growth of TDLs, which are transportation, distribution, and logistics centers or sectors, driven by our major freight hub, by our status as a major freight hub as a city and as a region. TDLs are infrastructure hubs that manage the movement of storage, distribution of goods. They also facilitate the flow of products across different supply chains. So while this growth presents economic opportunities for the region, it often occurs without considering cumulative impacts on neighborhoods that are already overburdened. Next slide, please. So really briefly, we wanted to give you some historical context here. In 2016, parents from Zapata Academy, a pre-K to 8th grade school in Little Village, raised concerns about Unilever's plans to expand its Hellmann's mayonnaise factory and distribution center located adjacent to the school. This expansion was expected to bring in an additional 500 to 900 trucks per day throughout the neighborhood, which raised serious health and safety risks for residents. Residents were understandably worried about how this influx of trucks would affect their safety and the well-being of their children. So in response, LVEJO Youth initiated a community science focused on truck counting. At the beginning of 2017, in the beginning of that school year, students from an AP statistics class at Infinity High School also began a truck counting project with the support of their teacher and LVEJO staff. Their findings were very telling. An average of one truck would pass through the intersection of 31st and Costner every minute. So that's one truck every minute. Unfortunately, the city invalidated these hand counts conducted by the students and approved the expansion. We know that current truck data from the city is very limited. Actually, if you head over to the CDOT's website, you can see data from 2016. That's nearly 20 years ago. So we know that the data gap is crucial for us understanding the current needs and impacts that our communities are facing. So we need accurate, more localized information to advocate effectively for our community safety and well-being. So this is why our ongoing data collection efforts are essential. And we aim to fill this gap and empower our communities with knowledge so that they can address these challenges. Next slide, please. So one of the ways in which our data is being used, Melanie can talk to you a little bit more later in our presentation around their work on NetZ, but this data has been very crucial in local conversations around diesel pollution. It has also been useful in supporting residents, specifically in Archer Heights, as they have been advocating for pedestrian safety improvements along Pulaski Road. We have also been working alongside and supporting our comrades in the Southeast Side, specifically during their town hall a couple months ago, where we connected with local residents and shared some of the data and got to hear some of their thoughts and the ways in which truck traffic impacts them directly. The data has also been used in federal proposals, specifically the U.S. Department of Transportation charging and fueling infrastructure, which hopes to potentially bring more electric charging infrastructure to the state of Illinois. Next slide, please. And we just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of the different data attention that media attention that our data has received over the past few months. We encourage you all to take a look and explore more after today's presentation. Next slide, please. And now I'll kick it off to my colleague, Paulina, who will be talking more about our findings and methods.
Thank you, Gada, for all of that amazing context. I'm going to provide a little bit more context before we get into the numbers. So first thing, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of our Chicago Truck data portal. It is a web page housed on CNT's website. Again, CNT being the nonprofit that I work at. And I could really spend so much time walking through this and going deep into its essence, but I'll be doing this just at a really high level right now. And I'm hoping that the Q&A and discussion after we can have a chance to get deeper into things. So Gato touched on some context already, but I'm going to go a little deeper into the health impacts. So one way that I really like to reframe the first statistic bolded here is how in the state of Illinois, less than 10 out of 100 vehicles on the road on average will be medium and heavy duty vehicles. And by that, I mean, think, box trucks to really heavy semis. So it's a small percentage of traffic. But despite that reality, these vehicles emit well over half of all of the particulate matter that vehicles emit. And that's filled with all sorts of nasty stuff, which includes black carbon, and also almost 70% of these nitrogen oxides, which they, like in the atmosphere, connect with other molecules, which forms ozone or smog, which is like really unhealthy to breathe. So there's a really good graphic here on the bottom that just shows how small particulate matter is specifically, and like the two different kinds, both which diesel exhaust has. And the second paragraph here illustrates a fairly comprehensive list of all the different things, ailments that diesel can do to the human body, right? From headaches to fatigue, to triggering asthma, all to, causing cancers and fatal heart attacks, premature death, especially if you have pre-existing health conditions. And, this is just the effects on, our health, but you also think about how much greenhouse gas emissions too are emitted from this, which fuel the climate crisis. And the statistic here is well over 30%. So that's just touching base on the health harms of diesel exhaust. So who is impacted by it? Well, pollution, diesel obviously being a source of pollution, diesel exhaust affects anyone in a city, especially cities being notoriously hubs for all sorts of pollution. But we're here talking today about environmental justice. So even though this diesel pollution can affect anyone in a city, regardless of age, race, class, etc., not everyone is affected the same, unfortunately. So we see here in this first paragraph, it just explains how, as Gato was saying, lower income neighborhoods and/or communities of color bear more of the brunt of this pollution. And it dials back down to practices like redlining, intercity highway expansion, in other words, examples of institutionalized racism. And the statistic here saying almost 30% more nitrogen dioxide, again, that forming into smog or ozone in our atmosphere, which is really noxious for our health. And, in these communities, again, treated like sacrifice zones, which got already touched base on, so I won't spend much time there. And we have a quote here, and something that I think is really special about not just our webpage, but the way that we frame truck traffic data is how these numbers inform lived experience, because a lot of times data, like numeric data, is wielded as superior or primary to people's life and like what they know. But we flip that narrative and center people's lived experiences and have our data bolster that rather than the other way around. So we do that in one way by some quotes here. We have Tony Isha. She's from the south side of Chicago. And this quote came from like a larger video that I saw from the campaign actually that Melanie works on. And she was, has had asthma mostly all of her life. And most of the people that she grew up with in the area also had asthma, and it was very normalized. But it's so disruptive to the day-to-day life, for example. That's the quote that she has here. And just, again, quote, the urgency to address the pollution, one solution being electrifying trucks, which isn't the full solution, which we'll get more into later. And the last section here refers to cumulative impacts, which I could talk about right now, or in a minute, I could show you in a very more colorful visual way what we mean by this. So that's what I'll do. Okay, so this is really getting into the meat of what our findings. So I really like this data visualization. So every dot that you see here, regardless of the size, shows one out of the 35 locations that we counted truck traffic. And why are they different sizes, might you ask? Well, the bigger the dot, the larger the volume of trucks and buses that we counted. Again, there were 35 locations. Most of them were intersections. A couple were mid-blocks, AKA just the middle of a street. And a handful were driveways of industries that we specifically wanted to capture truck traffic volumes. So you can zoom in, move around, really get interactive with it. And I'll move to the biggest dot that we have, which is in the community area of Archer Heights, which is also close to South Lawndale. We see here it was over 5,000 trucks, specifically 5,159 trucks and buses, again, medium and heavy duty vehicles, at the intersection of Pulaski and 41st. And we can just let that number sink in, just thinking in a given day. And this is by strip mall, mind you. There's plenty of people walking by, just seeing 5,000 trucks over a 24-hour period. That's a lot. And this here, I really like the way that we frame how the demographics too, which ties to, again, the whole issue of environmental injustice. We see here that Archer Heights is predominantly color, 85%. People of color, and within that, almost 80 of them are Latina. So it starts to connect the narrative that we so thoughtfully curated onto this webpage. And I'll click on one more. Let's do South Lawndale, since I've heard Little Village mentioned several times here. Through this location here, it's the same setup for every dot or location that we counted. So again, shows demographics, racial and ethnic ones, with the exact number of trucks and buses counted at that spot. So here we have over 2,700 on a typical weekday. And one last thing, which gets into a point about cumulative impacts, is that if you can toggle on this section here, you'll see a lot of color. And I'll explain what this means. So there's several types of cumulative impacts maps that exist. This is one that CNT created that is focused more on freight and logistics, more so than other cumulative impacts map that exists in the city. And it's a 5-point scale, 1 to 5. So 1 being the least burdened and 5 being the most burdened, and colors in between that, go to that range. And what do I even mean by that? So there's a whole methods document here, which really gets into the math, really gets into all the data sources, all the variables, etc. But to put it somewhat simply, is that there were 4 main categories that we took into consideration. One, it's demographics. So we looked at, racial, ethnic data points, like I just showed you above, and things like even children under 5 as some examples. We also looked at health complications, so asthma rates and COPD, for example. And we also looked at 3, it was environmental exposures. So although the data was somewhat limiting, we took into consideration what we had about PM 2.5 and ozone as some examples. And then the last category, the 4th one, was freight and logistics, and there was a whole slew of variables there, but some examples were proximities, and this is at the census block group scale, but proximities of these geographic areas to industrial corridors, proximity of them to rail yards. We even took into account the number of trucks registered in a zip code. So all of that and more came out to this. And something that I thought was really neat is how we actually counted and decided our locations before comparing it to this map. So we knew well before even overlaying it with this cumulative impacts map how there was going to be higher truck traffic, you know, in the southwest side of Chicago and the southeast sides of Chicago, just because that's where the city's largest industrial corridors are. So this comes to no surprise and just further affirms what we already know, which is still really helpful to see. Okay, so there's a couple other ways to view the numbers, which I think is really fun if you're into numeric stuff. So this section here is our report section. And all of the labels you see in blue are the official community area names of areas that we counted trucks and buses in. So I'll go into the Lower West Side, AKA Pilsen, and you see we counted at the intersection of Damon and Blue Island. And there's three different, well, two PDFs, one Excel here. They all have the same information, just shown in a different way. And I won't go into depth at this at all, but just to show you what we provide and have here in this open access data portal. So it shows you here, you know, a snapshot of the area, some photos of the location, and shout out to Cindy Fish at Fish Transportation Group. She was our consultant who deployed the cameras and made the summary report. So owe her a lot. So gratitude to that. And I won't get into this. It looks like a lot at first, but just to show you the depth of what we captured. So it has like hour by hour car data, pedestrian data, and up to trucks and buses. So if you really want to get detailed with it, we have it here if you want. But otherwise, we pull out the medium and heavy duty information and present it on the graph and the map that I just showed you. And we also present it at this graph here, which is our final visualization. And this shows all the locations together, which is a lot to look at also. But let's just do South Lawndale. So we counted at 6 spots in South Lawndale. And each spot has its own color, right? Costner Avenue 31st up to like Lawndale and 31st, for examples. And it shows you just hour by hour the number of trucks and buses. So you see here, let's go to the top. At the intersection of Pulaski and 36, we see at the hour of 10 a.m., so that's 10 to 11 a.m. On the date of April 11th, it was 335. So we get very specific with it. Okay, so showing some of the numbers there. And I'll move back into our presentation. But yeah, I'll drop the link later on if you haven't explored the portal. Really encourage you to do so. It's really easy to just get lost in the sauce of it all, but in a really inspiring way. So like I showed you, we had all these interesting numbers that really validated lived experiences in environmental justice communities. So how did we even capture this data? So I mentioned Fish Transportation Group and Cindy specifically. So what she did is that she would go out to an intersection or a street or a driveway that we wanted to count at, you know, and she would make sure that there was no construction, there wasn't like viaducts blocking the field of view, which was actually one problem. We couldn't count at a place in McKinley Park because there was a bridge in the way. But she would find some sort of like roadway sign, some sort of pole. You see here it was a bus stop. And then she would put an attachment pole mount. Here is what you see. And then at the tippy top of this attachment pole mount, there's a camera. And this camera would record for 24 hours. And then she would come take it down soon later. So this technology that we used, it's called MyoVision, which is the hardware that you see here, but it's also the software in the sense of Cindy would send the video to technicians who work at MyoVision. They would process it and then put it onto a web page that only our team had access to. So we had like the table that I showed you that had all the information that came from MyoVision software. And again, only we had access to it. So we wanted to make sure that the data was publicly accessible, especially for community advocacy, which is why we made it public facing and open source on CNT's webpage. And yeah, just it was really important to consider things like bad weather, etc. So that was the technology behind this data collection. And how about we watch some videos? So we actually had access to each location the full 24 hours, and that's a lot and kind of boring. So I took the liberty of reviewing them and made a compilation video. So I'll only play the first 15 seconds just so we get a sense of it. And there is no sound at all, and this is intentionally low resolution for privacy reasons. But you just see here, just few seconds for some locations, the vast amounts of truck traffic, and especially in proximity to pedestrians, walking, bicyclists. Okay, that's more than 15 seconds, so I'll pause there just so you get a sense of the visuals. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to take the next few slides to go over some more data snapshots before handing it off to Melanie. And we already referenced the most volume location that we captured, which was in Archer Heights, again, over 5,000. But I also just wanted to emphasize the pedestrian volumes here too. So we have 53 bicyclists and 129 pedestrians, which just, goes to show, again, not only people breathing in noxious air, but also the, safety concerns of being so close to such a large and heavy vehicle. So this graph, it's not actually available on the web page, but I did make it for the People's Town Hall that Gato referenced earlier, hosted by the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And again, it's just a different way to view the data that we provide on the website. So, nearly 3,000 trucks and buses on a given day at the intersection of Torrance and 126. And we have 89 pedestrians and 7 bicyclists. And something too that I also want to emphasize was the importance of providing this, in English and in Spanish due to the community there. And this is Ewing and 106. So we have over 1,200 trucks and buses on a day, and you see a lot more pedestrians. So it's over 1,700 there. So again, just like if you're not from the area like myself, I'm imagining there, but this also comes to no surprise for a lot of people who live there. Okay, this is the last graph that I will show, and I think this is the best graph we have for now that really ties to the reality of environmental injustice. So what this graph shows is, I'll start with Lincoln Park and Westtown. So these were the only two official community areas that we counted that are predominantly white on the north side. We counted a couple other spots on the north side, but they're not predominantly white. And it shows the percentage of all traffic, like how much of that is medium and heavy duty vehicles. Remember earlier I said like how less than 10 out of 100 vehicles generally will be trucks and buses. Well, you see here how in a given day at this intersection, Lincoln Park, Ashland, Fullerton, it was 4%. Same with this intersection in Westtown. And I did the same thing for community areas in the southeast side, again, given that was People's Town Hall day there. But we have, ranging from 5 to 10% on these intersections, in Riverdale, East Side, South Deering, and Hegewisch, all majority people of color community areas. But then we start to get to these tail ends here. So in this one intersection, Torrance and 126, which I showed you just earlier, that's 30% of traffic was diesel emitting traffic. And then the last two here, they were counted at a driveway of an intermodal rail yard. So that's 64, up to 3/4% of all traffic was trucks and buses. So these last three are like astronomically over the average for Illinois. So I know it's a lot of numbers to take in, but it just really goes to show the disparate impacts. Okay, I will pass it to Melanie.
Awesome. Thanks, Paulina. Yeah, y'all, we all just heard some very important data, and I'm gonna try to talk about some solutions in the next 5 minutes. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to save them for the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. We're gonna go ahead and skip this slide, but please let us know in the chat, what have y'all heard about zero emission vehicles? I'm so curious to know that piece. Next slide, please. So one of the many solutions that exist to this problem that we are seeing right now is zero emission vehicles. And so while they are not the full and only solution, they are a very important one. And so zero emission vehicles, or ZEVs, for those that don't know too much about them, are vehicles that produce zero exhaust or tailpipe emissions as they move. So for example, as a truck is operating, as a car is operating, a ZEV car or a ZEV truck will not be emitting any type of pollutant or any type of emissions in that process. There's different types of zero emission vehicles. The one that I'm going to focus on in this presentation, that is the focus of our campaign, is battery electric vehicles, specifically battery electric trucks. Next slide, please. So there's many reasons why we should electrify trucks, but I am going to list out some of the benefits for you all so that we can kind of dive into some of these questions that y'all might have later about it. Electric trucks bring so many benefits. They're user and driver friendly. They have great acceleration and braking, and they also provide no fuel odors. So drivers actually love driving them because they don't even have a lot of noise as you move them around. They provide concrete health and environmental benefits to communities, especially communities living in areas concentrated with diesel pollution. They also help foster jobs, given that it's the fastest growing workforce development, which has been in the works and will continue as long as the process to electrifying continues to happen. We see that just the charging infrastructure in and of itself could create more jobs and employ more folks, especially looking at employing folks in communities of color that have been historically disadvantaged and disenfranchised from different governmental opportunities. And also, we're seeing that there's lots of ways in which ratepayers like ourselves, people that pay electric bills, can also save money based on higher utilization of the electric grid. Next slide, please. So there's also many other reasons why we should electrify trucks. One of them being that 70% of what we buy is moved around in trucks. And so if we have trucks that don't emit greenhouse gas emissions, that don't emit diesel exhaust, that don't emit pollutants that harm our health, we're going to be better off in the long run. Many trucks travel less than 200 miles a day, making them perfect candidates for electrification. And also, unlike diesel trucks, batteries after a truck is used, those batteries can be recycled and given a whole new lifespan. A lot of times diesel trucks, once it's kind of run its life, they have to end up in a landfill. Next slide, please. So there are many policies to addressing this problem. These are just a few that our organizations have been working to push. These are known as the clean vehicle rules that have been adopted in other states already. These rules reduce pollutants in the air. They bring more zero emissions vehicles to the state, and they help facilitate a slow transition that creates structure for all different parts of the puzzle. So we're talking procurement, manufacturing, folks that actually make the trucks, the charging companies that actually create the infrastructure to charge, and also the utilities that help actually power the charging infrastructure that helps power the trucks. So I'm happy to dive into more detail of these policies later in the Q&A if y'all have any questions. Next slide, please. One very important thing that I wanted to talk about before I wrap up is that in community organizing and policy advocacy, there's many ways to move things forward, and a lot of it requires being flexible on who your target is. We've tried forever to get Governor Pritzker to adopt these rules. We've tried this at the legislature as well. So now we're trying with the Illinois Pollution Control Board. And so next slide, please. There is a hearing happening on December 2nd to provide oral and/or written comments on why the Pollution Control Board in Illinois should adopt the clean vehicle rules here in the state. And so if you scan this QR code, you can attend a public comment writing workshop that's going to happen in 2 weeks on October 22nd to learn more about how to submit a comment, but also help us in submitting comments, because we want to ensure that the agency, the Illinois Pollution Control Board, knows that people that are impacted by diesel pollution, people that have to breathe it every single day, are at the front lines of advocating for these electric trucks. So that was a ton of information. I know we have some time for Q&A, but feel free to scan the QR code if y'all want to attend and register our workshop. It will be a virtual one. And I left my email and also my Google Voice phone if y'all have any more in-depth questions about electrification. And then I think that moves us into the Q&A piece. Thank you all.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that amazing presentation, Caro, Paulina, and Melanie. If we were in a real space, I'm sure it would be like a full standing round of applause. But yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. For those who don't know, my name is Nat, and I am one of the staff members here at the LCC. And I'm going to be facilitating our Q&A. With the remaining time, I'd like to invite our student panelists who are in Rosa's class to share questions and their thoughts with the presenters. And so everyone else who is joining us, there will be opportunity after. So if you have any questions that you haven't been able to put into the Q&A feature, or you can also put it into the chat, this is the time to do so now while the students are asking their initial questions to the presenters. Do we have a first volunteer from Rosa's students? Go ahead, Renee, and then we could do Luna.
Hi, I'm Renee. I'm a second year graduate student in the biology program at UIC. I was wondering, because I know that you all are using these numbers to influence policy in Chicago, and I know also that there's a lot of truck drivers that are able to purchase their own trucks that they use. And I was wondering if you were in touch with any of the laborers, the people who are actually driving the trucks, to talk to them about the choices that they can make when they're, doing their job.
Should I try to tackle this one? Cool. That's a really great question, actually. So truck drivers are a very important base that we've been somewhat trying to interact with through the Neighbors for an Equitable Transition to Zero Emission campaign. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so that's kind of the biggest thing. The biggest obstacle that we come across is folks not knowing about electric trucks. It's not even just like hesitancy to drive them. It's just like there's no good information and accurate information out there that's easily accessible for folks. And so one thing that we've been doing at different tabling events, whenever we come across folks that drive trucks or have a parent or a loved one that drives trucks, we try to provide them with FAQ sheets, information, kind of like baseline talking points that we have for our campaign to ensure that folks just even have access to the information, especially in the time where we're getting so many rebates and incentives coming out from the federal level for smaller independent fleet operation-owned fleets to be able to purchase actual trucks. And so that's a big goal that we have, is to continue, connecting with folks to expand on that even more and really reach smaller, fleets where folks have, multiple trucks, where folks drive multiple trucks.
Luna, did you want to go? Because I had a question.
Yeah, I can go. So I actually started to draft up this question in my head before you presented the entire concept of those electric trucks. But so answer this however you'd like, I suppose. But I guess one of the biggest things, the biggest arguments against all of this pollutants and of the stuff that's been happening, specifically in these sacrifice zones, is that a lot of blue collar workers really benefit from those jobs, of being able to drive those trucks. And it is unfortunately a really good option for those who can't often find jobs, that driving those trucks is, how they make money. So how would you respond to someone who is, for example, trying to defend those actions of those the trucks passing by, in the sense that, oh, it gives people jobs? Again, I thought of this before I realized about these other alternatives, but I guess how could you explain this to someone who's maybe less educated, less informed?
I can try to tackle this one. I think for us, it's important to not vilify the drivers, the truckers, right? It's really the industry that we're after. They're the ones that are also paying truck drivers really low wages. A lot of truck drivers don't have benefits, retirement plans, and so we're really trying to also in this effort while we're tackling the health and safety impacts of truck traffic, we also want to tackle the labor rights of truck drivers. So we've been, trying to create space for that as well. Because like I said earlier, we're not after or against truck drivers, but we're, against the industry itself.
Yeah, my question is roughly around that same ballpark. And I used to work as a part of that industry within like retail, within like Walmart, Mariano's, those places. And I have seen a transition of going from the main companies having their own personal fleet, but then with benefits going out the door, they start transitioning to like owner operators. So I'm thinking like, what is the cost or what is the difference? Which I think somebody also had that question. What is the cost difference of an electric diesel vehicle versus a traditional like diesel vehicle?
Yeah, I can take that. So, at the core of it, the upfront cost of an electric truck is currently more expensive than the upfront cost of a diesel truck. That is fact. However, there's so many things that are happening right now that are helping lower the cost of the actual electric trucks. One of them is government incentives. There's also both at the federal level, at the state level, and then also the utility companies are coming out with their own incentives as well. So people can kind of benefit from like these different buckets depending on whether or not the buckets talk to each other, whether or not there's like clarity around that. But overall, the reason why electric trucks are so beneficial is because across their lifespan, they're actually a lot cheaper to maintain because they require so much less maintenance than a diesel truck. So oil changes are out the door for electric trucks. They're not necessary. Transmission fluid, shifts, all those things are not required because electric trucks are run on batteries. And again, the battery, even after, let's say, it fulfills its purpose, that battery can then be reused in some other capacity instead of just thrown out into a landfill. So there's so many economic, environmental, and health benefits that people get when they're able to purchase these trucks. But you're right, affordability is a really big issue. It's a really big concern. And I think that at the state level, at least in Illinois, getting some of these rules adopted will allow for there to be more of these trucks available. If more of them are available, more of them will become accessible. That's just kind of how like capitalism works.
I kind of have a,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Anissa.
no, go ahead, Monte, go ahead.
Yeah, I know you mentioned earlier about how these policies you've been trying to push these policies to Governor Pritzker. So like my question kind of goes back to like, has the city acknowledged the data or what has been the city's response to these policies?
I can quickly answer this. I think we're still due to have a conversation with the city, and I'm actually I'm currently technically on vacation right now, but I joined just for this call. But when I get back when do I get back? On like the 18th or something, I actually have a meeting with the Chicago Department of Transportation to talk about the potentially using funds for restarting like the Drive Clean Trucks program, which is a truck incentive program for the city of Chicago. So I think that's still up and coming.
Thank you so much for that. So we have like 5 minutes left in the presentation. And I do just want to say we have like really amazing questions coming in from audience members, both through our Q&A, also through the chat. A few of the things we have already touched on, but I'm gonna just kind of end on one question, and then afterwards we'll give some resources in order for folks to stay connected if any of this resonated with all of you. But there's actually so many good questions. I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, what do we ask? But I feel like now I'm like, what don't we ask? So a question that has kind of been brought up that you've already kind of touched on, but I feel like will be good kind of exiting question. I'm going to combine a few of the questions that were asked. But one is, how do you think that we can reduce car dependency in cities and transition to a more walkable city? So thinking of how we can transform Chicago, right? Thinking of public transit and also, of course, the trucking industry. But how do we think we can transition Chicago into a more walkable city? Um, yeah, that's kind of a paraphrase version of a few questions that were kind of pulled together.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few things. Definitely no more warehouses, no highway expansions. There's currently a specific policy that folks across the state, across the region are working on. It's called the Metropolitan Mobility Act. And so this piece of legislation is trying to consolidate the three major transportation agencies, which are Metro, PACE, and CTA. This would not result in major layoffs, right? I think when we think about consolidating, we think about layoffs. And so this would actually mean that these agencies are working together. Currently, they are not. So that it's caused a lot of issues around, for example, bus rapid transit efforts that have been attempted here in the city, specifically 10 years ago. Bus rapid transit is a system that creates dedicated bus lanes, which increases the efficiency of buses. We've seen examples of that in places like Colombia or Mexico City, where they've been very effective. And so unfortunately, there's great ideas for pedestrian improvement and just better public transit. However, our agencies are not collaborating as well as they could. And also we're experiencing a potential fiscal downfall, right? Where our public transit is running out of money. And so we need to figure out ways, we need to prioritize funding to public transit instead of prioritizing warehousing or highway expansions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And so we do have another question coming in from Rosa, who, if in this last minute, if you could kind of address, her question is the Inflation Reduction Act providing incentives to transition to electric trucks? And if so, where do truck drivers find this information?
Great question. So there is a grant. Illinois was recently awarded $430 million as a part of the Inflation Reduction Act through the CPRG, which is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But the CPRG offers $430 million that's divided into like all these different sectors. One of them includes buildings, the other one is transportation, and there's a lot of money being awarded to fostering education with fleet owner operators, transitioning folks from, that have worked on diesel trucks for so long, the maintenance of diesel trucks, transitioning them to work on electric battery powered trucks. This information is coming out in the coming months. So how I'm staying up to date is I'm kind of just like going on Illinois IEPA, and there's a listserv that you can log on to or sign up to. And that's how I'm getting more information that comes from the Illinois EPA. That's what I recommend for now, but that's something we pay close attention to ensure that we can communicate any information out to folks we're engaging with.
Thank you so much for that. We are at 6 p.m., so we kind of topped it off right on time. But I would like to say, especially to all of our audience members, thank you for everyone for joining us today. But also, I feel like, right, this presentation really resonated with a lot of folks. Like, I grew up and was born and raised on the Southeast side, right? So like seeing those numbers, it's not shocking, but also so heartbreaking. And so, right, if any part of this presentation resonated with you, attend their events, right? There was quite a few call to actions that were shared, whether you can go in person or whether it's supporting online or calling, right? Those are all things that were mentioned. And so we encourage you that if this resonated at all with you, attend their events, support them in the way that you can. There are folks already doing this work, and it's about us supporting them, and it's through things like this. And so, yeah, so again, thank you for this great presentation, Caro, Paulina, and Melanie. Thank you to all the students who put together their really insightful questions. And while this brings our program to a close, we hope that you can join us for our next virtual Climates of Inequality program, which we have. So this year is special. We're doing 2 in 1 month, which is different for us. And so our next Climates of Inequality is going to be on Wednesday, October 22nd from 5 to 6 p.m. Our guest speaker is going to be Citlali Trujillo, who's president of the board on Perro, which is the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization, right? So Pilsen's right next door to Little Village. And so Citlali is going to be coming in to speak about what's going on in Pilsen. And then we have another presentation happening November 19th with Michael Mendez, assistant professor in the School of Ecology at University of California, Irvine. So yeah, definitely stay in touch for all of our public programs, and we hope to see you at this next our next virtual Climates of Inequality series. But yeah, a little virtual round of applause for our 3 really great speakers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation, everyone who has participated today.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Thank you.